Welcome back to Animal Encounters. Today we are looking at 6 encounters with some of the most dangerous snakes alive. Handlers, farmers, guides, and collectors who each ran out of margin in a different way. From a Russell's viper lying motionless beneath a flooded Indian rice paddy at dusk, to a coastal taipan at the edge of a Queensland creek bed while a researcher's anti-venom kit sat 12 feet away. But first, we begin in Ocala, Florida, where a licensed exotic snake breeder enters his own facility at the start of what should have been an ordinary morning. It was March 14th, 2017, at a private reptile breeding facility on the outskirts of Ocala, Florida. Delvyn Wescott, 54, had spent nearly 3 decades in exotic snake breeding, holding a Class 3 wildlife license, and running a permitted operation, supplying zoos, research institutions, and licensed collectors across the country. His purpose-built facility housed over 60 venomous snakes. The centerpiece was a group of 7 king cobras, including a 12-foot male he had raised from a hatchling 11 years prior, an animal weighing just under 20 pounds that Wescott had handled thousands of times without serious incident. His part-time assistant, Trace Mulvern, 26, arrived most mornings to help with feeding and enclosure upkeep. Standard opening procedure required Wescott to run a brief cooling cycle before entering any king cobra enclosure, a drop in ambient room temperature to reduce the animal's activity level before access. It was his own procedure, written into his facility documentation. Facility records would later show it had been skipped at least 3 times in the previous 5 weeks. That detail matters because each uneventful skip made the next one feel less like a risk and more like a non-event. On March 14th, Mulvern was running behind schedule. Wescott entered the breeding room alone. The room sat at 79 degrees Fahrenheit. The 12-foot male was fully active at the front of its enclosure. That is how it works with a routine that has never failed. Every time it does not fail, it feels more like proof than habit. And then one morning, the proof runs out. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes on Earth, commonly reaching 12 to 18 feet. Their venom is neurotoxic and fast-acting, capable of causing respiratory failure in an adult within 30 to 45 minutes of a full envenomation. Unlike most venomous species, king cobras actively track and pursue perceived threats rather than striking from a fixed position. Repeated captive handling has been documented to increase rather than reduce aggression in some individuals. Based on the position of injuries and the state of the enclosure gate when Mulvern arrived, investigators reconstructed what likely occurred after Wescott entered the breeding room. The 12-foot male, fully alert at 79 degrees, moved actively toward the enclosure gate rather than retreating consistent with documented king cobra behavior when a perceived threat enters its space at peak body temperature. The first strike caught Wescott on his right forearm. King cobras under active engagement do not disengage after a single bite. The animal followed through, and a second strike landed on his upper hand before he could fully clear the enclosure area. The combined venom load from 2 strikes delivered by a 12-foot animal would have been significant. Neurotoxic king cobra envenomation does not allow for a slow decline. Within minutes of the strikes, Wescott would have felt intense localized pain and rapid swelling in the affected arm, followed quickly by a spreading heaviness moving up through the shoulder as the toxin began disrupting nerve signals along its path. The muscles of the chest and throat are affected. Next breathing becomes labored, then increasingly difficult as the signals coordinating the respiratory muscles are progressively interrupted. Investigators determined from his final position on the floor near the enclosure gate, well short of the emergency kit mounted on the far wall, that the progression moved faster than his ability to reach help. He did not make it to the exit. He did not make it to the kit. He was on the floor, partially blocking the gate, when Mulvern walked in approximately 35 minutes later. Mulvern called emergency services immediately. Paramedics reached the facility within 18 minutes, but Wescott was already unresponsive. He was transported to the regional medical center where antivenom was administered. The delay between the bites and treatment, combined with the venom load from a 12-foot animal, proved unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead 4 hours after admission. Authorities cited the absent cooling protocol and the pattern of solo entry without the required secondary observer, both violations of Wescott's own written safety documentation. No criminal charges were filed. All 7 king cobras were transferred to a licensed holding facility. I keep thinking about the fact that he wrote the protocol himself. Nobody understood those bears better than he did, but that's exactly what makes this so unsettling. Nothing dramatic happened for weeks, so the routine slowly changed. One shortcut didn't matter, then another, until one morning it suddenly did. While a Florida breeding facility had cost Delvyn Wescott everything in the span of 35 minutes, a flooded rice paddy nearly 10,000 miles east would soon reveal how little the setting matters when the margin is already gone. On August 22, 2015, in the Kendrapara district of Odisha, eastern India, the late monsoon light was fading over flooded rice paddies stretching toward the tree line. Prabhav Tandwal, 38, was finishing an evening irrigation check across a plot his family had farmed for nearly 15 years. The route, the timing, the sequence of crossings, all of it was as familiar as anything in his working life. Monsoon season reliably drew Russell's vipers into the paddy's rising water, forced small prey animals onto the raised earthen bunds separating the fields, and the snakes followed. Tandwal knew this. Most farmers in the district did. 2 days earlier, a stretch of heavy rain had partially collapsed one of the bund sections on his standard evening route, forcing him to step down through standing water rather than staying on the elevated path. He had made that crossing 6 times since the collapse. 6 times. Nothing. The 6th crossing had felt no different from the first, and the 7th that evening would have felt no different from the 6th, right until the moment it was. 6 crossings without incident, building quietly toward a 7th that nothing about the first 6 could have warned him against. That is not carelessness. That is how repetition becomes exposure, and it happens the same way to experienced people as it does to inexperienced ones. Russell's vipers cause more human snakebite deaths than any other species in South Asia. Adults reach 4 to 5 feet and are ambush predators, remaining perfectly still in mud and standing water until contact forces a response. Their venom attacks blood clotting, destroys surrounding tissue, and in serious envenomations drives kidney failure and cardiovascular collapse. The viper had been motionless beneath the standing water at the base of the collapsed bund section. Tandwal would not have seen it. The bite struck his left ankle as he stepped down into the water. The pain was immediate and sharp, radiating up from the ankle into the calf within seconds. Russell's viper venom begins breaking down the tissue surrounding the bite site almost at once. The skin and muscle in the immediate area start to deteriorate rapidly, and the swelling begins pushing up the leg within minutes. Tandwal turned and moved toward the edge of the field, away from the water. He covered approximately 40 yards. The venom's disruption of blood pressure and fluid distribution was already working against him by the time he reached the field boundary. The swelling had risen past the ankle, the leg was losing reliability, and the clotting failure meant internal damage was accumulating in ways that had no visible wound to account for them. He went down near the field boundary. A neighboring farmer, alerted by the disturbance, reached him within minutes. Tandwal was conscious but deteriorating fast. The swelling was visible above the knee. The surrounding tissue had darkened, and his blood pressure was dropping. Transport was arranged immediately, but the nearest government medical facility was roughly 25 miles away across deteriorated rural roads. The drive took over an hour. By the time Tandwal arrived, the systemic effects were advanced. Antivenom was administered, but the clotting disruption could not be reversed in time. He died in the early hours of the following morning. No investigation was launched. His death was recorded as a snakebite fatality in regional health data. What stays with me about this story is the infrastructure. 25 miles over an hour, roads that turned a survivable window into something that was not. There is nothing in this story that points to a failure by Prabhav Tandwal. The failure was the road and the distance, and it cost him everything. While a collapsed bund in Odisha had taken Prabhav Tandwal on an evening he had lived dozens of times before, a research trail in the dry thornbush country of KwaZulu-Natal was about to show him an 80-yard detour can carry exactly the same weight as any deliberate miscalculation. It was June 8th, 2016, in the dry thornbush terrain of northern KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Solange Mfuti, 34, was a field research assistant with a conservation monitoring group north of Hlulue. 6 years in the region had made her capable and methodical. Her work covered vegetation, transects, camera trap servicing, and GPS marking of animal sign. That morning, she was running a solo camera trap check loop along the eastern study boundary. The assigned route followed established game trails that had been specifically chosen to skirt the dense thornbush scrub to the northeast. That was not an arbitrary choice. The route had been planned with the terrain's risks in mind. Mfuti had run it more than 30 times. At some point that morning, a storm-felled acacia lay across the trail ahead. Her Her GPS track, reviewed afterward, showed a deviation beginning at that point approximately 80 yards east into the scrub section. The route had been designed to avoid. The detour would have taken less than 3 minutes. It would have looked like nothing, and that is exactly the problem. 32 previous loops had made the path feel safe by repetition rather than by certainty, and an 80-yard gap around a fallen tree would not have registered as the kind of decision that needed a second thought. That is what I find hardest about this one. There was no marker at that fallen tree, no way for Solange Mfuti to know that the safe path and the dangerous one were separated by exactly 80 yards. The previous 32 loops had not prepared her for the one that mattered. Black mambas are among the fastest and most venomous snakes in Africa, commonly reaching 8 to 10 feet and documented at speeds approaching 12 miles per hour over short distances. Their venom is potently neurotoxic, targeting facial and respiratory muscles in rapid progression. When cornered or threatened in dense cover, they are well documented to strike multiple times in rapid succession. Scene reconstruction, based on physical evidence in the thorn bush and the injury pattern found on Mfuti, placed the encounter shortly after she entered the dense scrub section. A black mamba disturbed at close range in enclosed cover does not retreat. It responds immediately and with speed. One of the more clinically significant characteristics of black mamba envenomation is that the initial bite produces relatively little pain compared to hemotoxic species. The sharp, immediate signal that warns a victim of a serious bite is largely absent. What replaces it, within minutes, is a spreading heaviness in the face and jaw, difficulty swallowing, and a tightening in the throat that the person experiencing it recognizes almost immediately. The progression moves from the face downward toward the chest. Breathing becomes effortful before it becomes impossible, and the person remains alert and aware through much of the process. Multiple envenomation marks on Mfuti's right hand and lower arm indicated more than one strike, consistent with a close-range defensive encounter in thornbush with little room for either party to move. The venom load from multiple bites in that window would have collapsed the treatment timeline sharply. Based on her final position relative to the entry point of the scrub, she had not been able to move far after the encounter ended. When Mfuti failed to make her midday radio check-in, her team leader, Lucas Bergstrom, 39, drove the eastern boundary track. He found her field bag approximately 40 yards inside the scrub. She was found nearby, unresponsive. Emergency services were contacted, but the site was over an hour from the nearest hospital stocking antivenom. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The research group's post-incident review identified a protocol gap check-ins at fixed time intervals rather than at individual route waypoints, and new solo fieldwork requirements were implemented. Looking back, those 32 earlier loops say everything. They turned the route into something completely ordinary, right up until it wasn't. It was just the path. In the morning, a tree fell across it. There was nothing left in the routine that could warn her what 80 yards off it would cost. While a thornbush detour in South Africa had ended Solange Mfuti's final field loop, a jungle trail in the Peruvian Amazon was about to show how no amount of preparation fully accounts for an ambush predator that has been invisible on the forest floor since before any of them arrived. It was October 3rd, 2021, along a secondary trail in the Madre de Dios region of the Peruvian Amazon. Ronaldo Brescave, 31, had been guiding ecotourists through the lowland forest for 5 years, leading clients into sections of primary forest most operators left off their maps. He held wilderness first aid certification, read the forest floor carefully, and had a consistent, practiced habit of leading from the front to check each section of trail before his clients reached it. That habit had kept 4 people safe on dozens of walks. It was, that morning, also the reason he was first to the route cluster. That morning, Brescave was guiding 4 clients, 2 American couples, along a low canopy trail section he had walked approximately 40 times over 2 seasons. October is the beginning of the Amazonian wet season. The ground was soft and layered deep with decomposing leaf material, and visibility into the forest floor was close to zero in the denser sections. The trail had not been formally cleared since before the dry season. Brescave had noted that. He had filed it the way experienced guides file most low-level details as information, not necessarily as a reason to stop. They were already a kilometer in. I think that is the detail that follows me in this story. 40 walks on the same trail, a habit of always being first, a trail that had not been checked since the dry season. Each one of those things individually is manageable. Together, they were already in place before any of them reached the route cluster. The Bushmaster is the longest venomous snake in the Western Hemisphere, reaching up to 12 feet. A nocturnal pit viper, it spends daylight hours coiled in deep leaf litter, where its patterning makes it invisible at ground level. Its venom yield is among the highest of any snake in the Americas, producing rapid tissue breakdown, internal bleeding, and cardiovascular involvement. In remote jungle terrain with multi-hour evacuations, untreated bites are almost always fatal. Roughly 1 kilometer from the main trailhead, Brescovay stopped the group and moved ahead alone to examine a section of trail partially obscured by a cluster of exposed roots. According to the clients positioned behind him, he appeared to detect the snake in the root cluster and began to step back. The Bushmaster struck. Before he had fully cleared the area, the bite landed on his lower right leg, and he went down immediately. A large Bushmaster strike drives long fangs deep into the muscle with significant force. The venom begins working almost at once. The bite site swells rapidly. The tissue around it starts to break down, and the venom simultaneously interferes with blood clotting, meaning the internal damage expands well beyond what any visible wound suggests. Within minutes, the swelling was pushing past the boot line. Brescovay was on the ground, conscious and aware of what the swelling meant. He could not stand. He gestured to the clients to stay back from the root cluster. One activated a personal locator beacon. Another radioed base camp. No one approached the snake. Brescovay remained on the ground while the venom continued to work, the tissue destruction spreading, the blood pressure dropping, the cardiovascular effects compounding the blood loss from the clotting failure. He was conscious for the first section of the canoe evacuation to the nearest road access point. He lost consciousness during the vehicle transfer. Total evacuation time exceeded 5 hours from the moment of the bite. He did not survive. The Regional Tourism Authority reviewed the incident. Investigators noted the trail had not been assessed since before the wet season, a period when Bushmaster movement near creek systems increases with rising prey activity. No regulatory violations were cited. The trail section was suspended. It's hard to get past where Brescovay was standing that morning. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. After 40 walks on that trail, leading from the front was just part of the routine. It simply put him first in front of something that had been waiting there the whole time. While a jungle trail in Peru had taken Ronaldo Brescovay despite everything he did correctly, a stretch of lowland rainforest in Cameroon was about to show what happens when the safety infrastructure is not absent due to circumstance, but by design. It was February 17th, 2017, in the lowland rainforest fringe of Cameroon's southwest region. Ambroise Chemu, 47, had been pulling live exotic reptiles out of that forest for nearly a decade. No permits, no documentation, no oversight. His operation fed informal supply chains, moving specimens into private collections in Europe and the Gulf states. Regional wildlife enforcement had been building a file on his activities for approximately 2 years without enough to act on. His primary target was the Gaboon viper large, slow-moving, and commanding significant prices from collectors who paid for size and pattern. For someone with Chemo's forest knowledge, it was reliably findable. For someone with Chemo's working method, it was also the kind of animal that offered no margin when something went wrong. The morning of the 17th, he was working a section of forest roughly 12 miles from the nearest road. He had located a large Gaboon viper the previous afternoon and returned the following morning with a collecting bag and a wooden handling rod. He came back alone. The method, pinning the animal behind the head with the rod while working the bag underneath, was a standard approach in informal collecting operations and worked on cold or sluggish animals. The problem was the specific animal he came back for. It had been resting in a shaft of direct sunlight breaking through the canopy overnight, and by morning it was significantly more alert than the day before. He had been here before. He had done this before. Neither of those things was going to matter. I will say it plainly. Chemo was operating illegally, alone, 12 miles from any road, with no emergency contact and no means of signaling for help if anything went wrong. Whatever skill he had built across 10 years in that forest made no difference to that arithmetic. Alone, remote, no backup. That was not a gap in his plan. That was the plan. The Gaboon viper is the heaviest venomous snake in Africa and carries the longest fangs of any snake species in the world, exceeding 2 inches in large adults. Adults reach 4 to 5 feet and weigh up to 18 pounds. Their venom is hemotoxic and cytotoxic, causing immediate severe tissue destruction, catastrophic disruption of blood clotting, and in serious bites, cardiovascular collapse. The long fangs ensured deep venom delivery even through partial contact. The animal recovered at the scene was a large adult estimated at over 4.5 feet. Based on marks on the animal's neck and the position of the collecting bag, investigators determined Chikamu had achieved partial restraint before the bite occurred. The strike caught him on the right hand. A gaboon viper bite to the hand is one of the most damaging possible outcomes of an envenomation from that species. The hand concentrates tendons, vessels, and small bones in a dense space, and 2-inch fangs drive venom directly into that structure at full depth. The cytotoxic component begins destroying local tissue almost at once. The hand swells fast, the skin pulls tight, and the structures beneath begin to break down from within. The hemotoxic component simultaneously removes the blood's ability to clot, meaning the internal destruction cannot be contained by the body's normal response. Without antivenom, neither process plateaus. The cardiovascular effects, progressive blood pressure drop, fluid loss into surrounding tissue compound the internal damage and move the body toward collapse. Chemo understood what was happening. He had worked that forest for a decade. He attempted to move toward the road, 12 miles away. Based on the trail he left and the position of the discarded collecting bag, investigators determined he covered approximately 300 yards before he could no longer continue. His body was found 2 days later by a local hunter. The Gaboon viper was recovered alive and uninjured at the original site. Regional Wildlife Enforcement documented the scene and referred a case file to National Environmental Crime Authorities. No further arrests were made. The animal was transferred to a licensed research center in Yaoundé. The Gaboon viper was the only one at that scene that ended up somewhere it was legally supposed to be. 10 years of working that forest, and the one morning Chemo came back for the same animal twice, the forest did not give him a third day. While a Cameroonian rainforest had swallowed Ambrose Tichmu with no witness and no road within reach, a dry creek bed in far north Queensland was about to show how 12 feet of open ground can become that only distance that matters. It was September 5th, 2020, on the Cape York Peninsula in far north Queensland, Australia. Callum Brinsworth, 43, was a freelance herpetologist under contract to a university wildlife monitoring program, running his second consecutive field season along a remote transect corridor east of the Wenlock River. 15 years of professional work around venomous reptiles, 3 published research papers, and a reputation in the program for careful, methodical, solo fieldwork. He had been at the site for 4 days of a planned 7-day run. That afternoon, he was working the dense grass fringe along the edge of a dry creek bed, approximately 1.5 miles north of his base camp. He had left his pack at the edge of the survey area within it. In its designated pocket was a pressure immobilization bandage and his satellite communicator, both standard field safety equipment for solo researchers on the program. The pack was approximately 12 feet from the position where he would later be found. That detail will matter. Keep it in mind. Daily protocol required 2 radio check-ins with the university field coordinator 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. On September 5th, Brinsworth checked in at 8, noted that morning's findings, and outlined his planned afternoon survey area. He did not call in at 4. That gap between the 8 o'clock check-in and the silence that followed is the small hinge that everything in this story turns on. He noted the survey area. He left his pack at the creek edge. He walked 12 feet into the grass fringe. The routine that had held for 4 days had 30 seconds left in it. The coastal taipan is one of Australia's most medically significant venomous snakes, found in the tropical zones of North Queensland and the Northern Territory. Adults commonly reach 5 to 6.5 feet. Their venom is highly neurotoxic, disrupting nerve to muscle signal transmission and producing rapid progressive paralysis. Unlike many Australian species, taipan bites are almost always full envenomations, delivered fast and without hesitation. Without prompt medical treatment and antivenom administered in a hospital, respiratory failure can occur within hours. The bite mark on Brinsworth's right calf was consistent with a strike from low grass at knee height or below, the kind of encounter investigators characterized as the accidental disturbance of a resting animal in dense, creek-edge ground cover. A coastal taipan struck at close range does not hesitate, and the bite was almost certainly a full envenomation delivered on contact. The neurotoxic effects begin within minutes. There is often surprisingly little pain at the bite site, while weakness and other systemic symptoms begin developing as the toxin disrupts nerve-to-muscle communication. The facial muscles are affected, next eyelids lose precision, jaw control diminishes, and swallowing becomes difficult as the toxin reaches the muscles of the throat. The chest follows. Breathing becomes something that requires conscious effort, then labored effort, as the nerve signals coordinating the respiratory muscles are progressively cut off. The person remains alert and aware through most of this process. Brinsworth had 15 years of professional experience with exactly this species. He knew what the early neurological symptoms meant. He knew what the timeline looked like. He moved toward his pack. Based on his position when he was found and the direction he was facing, scene reconstruction indicated he was moving toward it when the progression overtook him. His satellite communicator had been activated, but he was working in a slight topographical depression at the creek edge that disrupted the outgoing signal. It had not connected. The pressure immobilization bandage was 12 feet away. He did not reach it. By the following morning, Queensland Parks and Wildlife had dispatched a field team after the university reported the missed check-in. Brinsworth was found near the creek edge. His field notebook held entries up to early afternoon. The university published a full post-incident review. Revised protocols now require solo researchers to confirm satellite communicator signal from each new survey position before beginning ground-level work. The 12 feet between his pack and where he was found became the factual basis for a procedural change applied to every solo researcher in the program from that point forward. The 12 feet are hard to get past. That's all that separated him from his gear. He wasn't taking a chance. He wasn't ignoring the danger. It was just a pack in the grass, the way he'd probably done countless times before. Then the one piece of equipment he needed was out of reach.